I am really very delighted to reconnect with after a number of years that we haven't really had the chance to interact directly. I was going to make your life a bit easy, Chair, when you said that the men on this panel constitutes a miserable minority. And I reminded myself of a joke that came out of Algeria at the height of the Civil War, when a certain young man was stopped by a FAH roadblock. The FAH was the main group that was fighting to install some kind of an Islamic state or so in Algeria. And he was with his girlfriend in the car. Now, it was bad news to be stopped by FAH under those conditions. And the commander of the group asked the young lady, "What are you doing with this guy?" And she tried to explain. He said, "Well, what's your name?" And she said, "Well, Amina." "Well, okay, I'll forgive you this time because my mother is also called Amina. So you get out of the car and go." And then for you, the young man, trying to corrupt this young girl, you've had it. "What's your name?" He said, "Well, they named me Ibrahim, but generally at home, they also call me Amina." So I'm very happy to be called Amina. For the purposes of this panel, right? But I very much appreciate the contributions which the colleagues have made who spoke before me. A lot of what has been said resonates very, very much with me, and I hope to be able to build on it, and doing so with a bit of a recollection. The first of it is to argue that, again, in continuation of some of the conversations we've had over the last 2 days, that the quest for a marriage of the sciences and a reform of curriculum is an old one on our continent, and we've heard from the panelists. One area where I think we need to place emphasis in that historicization is also the fact that, to its credit, the humanities actually led that quest more than any of the other body of disciplines. When we come to think of it, whether across literature, across languages, or even the discipline of history and how it is to be taught, most of the important battles which we fought in the period after 1945 to the first decade or so of independence were fought and waged mostly around the humanities, both within the formal walls of the academy, but also importantly outside of the academy, including on the pages of newspapers, where in places like Dakar, it was as important to listen to Sheikh Anta Diop as it was to read the philosophical jousts between Senghor and his fellow Negritude philosophers, as informative as educative. So that we actually had a meeting of minds which was most easily executed within the humanities to reframe the context both of higher education and of the project of national development, and find a proper anchorage for it. The rest of the sciences, particularly the social sciences, mostly played catch-up, right? Mostly played catch-up. And Indeed, a catch-up which only began to happen on account of a quest within the social sciences for alternative frames for understanding the African condition over and above what was inherited wisdom and which passed as global, sold to us as the universal and the global, and in which we found ourselves, rather than, for example, doing what was done in literature, to fight battles to change English literature departments into departments of literature in English, as was fought in some of the countries. We found ourselves in the social sciences fighting battles to change the title of our degrees from simply politics to political science, so that we could be scientific in that universal, at a time when a behavioral revolution was going on in American social sciences. A behavioral revolution which had its own objective reasons for taking place in the American social sciences as it globalized itself, but which actually responded to American local imperatives and not to a global imperative. So we were caught in a dual situation in many of our university campuses, in which on the one hand, there was a veritable investment in a journey of rediscovery and endogeneity in the humanities that made it actually, for my own generation of students, far more interesting to go to the workshop theater village of Ahmadu Bello University and watch the performance of Kantemba or Ferdinand Oyono or any of the other writers, or made it interesting for us in our book clubs to read the African Writers series that flourished under the label of Heinemann at the time, than sit in a political science class where we were not sure if we were doing mathematics with all of the equation, and with my apologies to C, our rapporteur, right? I have nothing against mathematics. But when you do a course on nation building and it becomes a course on quadratic equations, and you begin to ask yourself, between what Ferdinand Oyono writes or what Ayikwe Ama says about the beautiful ones are not yet born, and what your political science professor, freshly returned from the United States, immersed in a behavioral revolution under the supervisors in Madison and elsewhere in the US, where most African students went to, coming back to do equations on national integration, you are bound to ask yourself questions. We learned it, but we really didn't imbibe it. And I think that probably also explains the frustration of a generation of scholars, Samir Amin and others, who then proceeded to launch bodies like Codesria and the like. That's a story for another day. But I think it's important that we grasp this history and reflect on it in order probably to put a bit of context into what the colleagues have said, and as well as an agenda. And my view in all of this is that between the humanities and the nationalist movement of independence, there was a uniformity or a commonality of objectives, which was about what Nkrumah called, and the Pan-Africanists called, rediscovering the African personality. That idea that after 500 years of dehumanization, the project of independence was not simply about raising a flag, but very much about rediscovering our humanity. And that was encapsulated in the old notion of the early Pan-Africanists when they talked about the African personality and reconstituting it, and brought into mainland continental politics in a way in which, despite their different political temperaments, actually Senghor, Nyerere, and Nkrumah found a meeting point. Because after all, what was Senghor's negritude about? If it was not about the rediscovery of our personality, and Nkrumah's own radical claims for the assertion of that personality was that juncture of connection that I think played an important role. And my question to us today, in the context of everything that has been said, which I agree with, is basically to say that that business of rediscovering our personality is an unfinished business. And it is located in the notion of dignity. For me, that idea of dignity, the dignity, number one, of human life, and the dignity of the African. And until we are able to actually place that notion, that idea of dignity as the starting point for the construction of a vision of society, I don't think we are going to go far. Because, of course, there were people who fought. I mean, Sheikh Anta Diop fought intellectual battles. Wole Soyinka fought battles. At the point, even had to leave the university system because, you know, his disruption, his fights, like Sheikh Anta Diop was also disruptive, right? We celebrate Sheikh Anta Diop after his death. Whilst he was alive, he was seen as a disruptive figure, like Yusuf Bala Usman in Zaria, disrupted history. And they are saying, no, there is a way of teaching history. And he said, no, there is no way of teaching history. We disrupt it and reconstitute it. Now, I think in order for us to carry that battle forward, we need to be able to place that idea of the African personality that was at the heart of Pan-Africanism into our discourses of dignity. And I'm very convinced, ever more so about it, at every opportunity I have to speak where our leaders are present, in the room, Tana Forum and elsewhere, no matter the topic I am given, I try to talk to them about dignity. Because the country and the people who do not understand and win back their dignity are never going to transform. Never. What is the story of China? What is the story of Japan? What is the story of Korea? It is anchored around a never again principle. Shall anybody dehumanize us? Nobody will dehumanize us. We are humiliated. The Chinese will always tell us that the humiliation of the Opium War will never be repeated again. The Japanese and their experience of being under American colonial domination, it will never happen again. The Koreans, theirs is that the Japanese humiliated us. And to this day, as you know, between Korea and Japan, despite the fact that they are the two biggest trading partners with each other, the Yakuza, the shrine business, and the memories of the war, I tell the Japanese, you must apologize. You humiliated us. It will never happen again unless we Africans, and we have had a share of humiliation in the international system, that I believe that anybody leading any African country who does not start from the premise that dignity, winning back that dignity, is the starting point of everything else, we are not going to go far. Now, within that, we can frame a vision. And I agree completely with Nuria and Setu that there we can only build curriculum of a meaningful and relevant type, which is anchored. Now, you can't revise curriculum for the sake of it. And that's, I like what Mamadou said on the first day. Ask your average university professor to revise a curriculum, and then we'll be looking for what Harvard teaches. My God. Or what they teach in Sorbonne on the subject. How is that of interest as a starting point? Because those who write the curriculum for Sorbonne write it out of a vision. And there is an underlying value system. Those who write for Harvard, they know what they are looking for. unless we have that vision that is anchored on our quest to restore the African humanity as a valid endeavor and build around that vision, we will not produce curriculum that matters. And I agree also with the minister that in that framework, the issue of disciplinarity becomes actually a subsidiary question, not the original question, not the initial question. It becomes a subsidiary question. Because look at it again. We've been faced with a pandemic. We have very good medical doctors who can be employed anywhere in the world. But to what extent are they anchored in our local context, connected to indigenous knowledge systems and processes as to be able to rise up to the challenge? We're all waiting for COVAX. COVAX arrives at 2 a.m. at the airport. The minister, sometimes even the prime minister and the president go to the airport to receive COVAX and then celebrate it as an achievement. Yeah, now we have vaccines and they vaccinate themselves first and show it on TV. And that's what we've seen. I've followed this country after country and just feel very sorry that we are still in that logic where we operate as much as in our educational system as in our political processes, governance arrangements that effectively reproduce our dehumanization. Despite the fact that our so-called friends who love Africa so much and love Africans, from Macron to Biden, what was the difference between Biden and Trump over vaccines, and all the others, it was about their people first. And when Johnson was asked, Prime Minister Johnson was asked, he said, listen, I was elected to take care of the British people. That's my first job. Then when we finish taking care of the British people, oh yeah, our African friends, come to London. And we all fly to London and do summit on education in London. And these are the kinds of inversion. So when I thought about this panel, for me, baseline, let us rediscover our dignity. If we rediscover our dignity, we will have the confidence to project forward. That kind of confidence which we saw in glimpses at independence with Nkrumah or even Modibo Keita, which we saw with Thomas Sankara later on, and which legacy still stays with us in bits and pieces, of fragments that need to come together to say that this is the template on the basis of which Africa engages with itself and will engage with the world. And in that way, we are not going to be in a situation of simply mimicking curriculum from elsewhere in the world and following trends of which we are not part of a mainstream and introducing changes in our degree awarding arrangements only because Harvard is now awarding degrees in the field, so it's now okay to start awarding degrees, but on the basis of history, on the basis of need, and on the basis of where we want to go to. Curriculum is a statement of ambition, and nobody can be ambitious for us. We have to be ambitious for ourselves. This is Amina. Thank you.